How's he described? كان أسن من أخيه عمر وأسلم قبله. He was 1 year older than Umar radiallahu anhu, and he became Muslim a year before Umar radiallahu anhu. So it gets very interesting. He became Muslim before Umar. سبق أخيه إلى الإسلام, which is really crazy, subhanAllah, when you think about it, right? The quiet muhajirin around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He looked exactly like Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu in his physical stature, except that he had a darker complexion radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So he had a dark complexion, and he's described as كان طويلا بائن الطول. He was awkwardly tall, huge human being. Physical stature was imposing. If Umar radiallahu anhu is tall, think of him as being the same height or perhaps even taller, because in every biography of him, his height was so imposing that when he was far away with the people, he was the only one that you knew was approaching. So you think about the physical meaning of that, right? If a group of people are approaching from afar, the only person you could tell from them all was Zaid ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But with that, his height, with his posture, with his position, he's extremely quiet. An imposing physical presence, extremely quiet. And subhanAllah, one thing about him that's really interesting, you only hear his voice in battle. Like the narrations about him, the only time he seems to open his mouth, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, is in the battlefield. The person that I could liken him to in this regard is the brother of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, al-Bara ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? Remember Anas radiallahu anhu, this prolific hadith narrator? Al-Bara radiallahu ta'ala anhu, throw me in the battlefield, right? And he doesn't talk much. So he's the silent brother of Umar radiallahu anhu, looks like Umar, slightly darker complexion, the same physical, imposing presence, but a very quiet man who does as the Prophet ﷺ says. Listen to these manaqib, listen to these virtues. He became Muslim before Umar, he made hijrah before Umar, he died shaheed before Umar. May Allah be pleased with them both. So his virtues are incredible. On top of that, he was the pride of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. What do I mean by that? You don't see a man praising his brother the way that Umar praises Zayd. And we're going to talk about that. So his entire biography is almost narrated by the way that Umar radiallahu anhu praised his brother. Like you don't know who he is. He's a victim of his silence, as we said, in terms of the documentation of the history books. But Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu praises Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu in a way that demonstrates that he envied his silent righteousness. Remember, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would regret often, he'd regret if he spoke, right? And he would say that I wish I could be a quiet believer that enters the gathering and leaves the gathering and no one notices that he is there. And that is one of the praiseworthy personalities that the Prophet ﷺ mentions. Not everyone who gets into Jannah has to be that leader. In fact, sometimes we overpraise the profile of a leader. Most of Ahl al-Jannah don't fit that profile of on the front lines and speaking and loud and making your presence known. The Prophet ﷺ mentions the person who enters the gathering and leaves unnoticed. SubhanAllah, Salim, pure from the sins of the gathering, doesn't open their mouth to backbite, doesn't get on anybody's bad side, just puts their head down and worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until the time they leave this world. That is a profile of a person of Jannah. And Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu fits this profile. In every battle, wherever you saw the Prophet ﷺ, you saw Zayd. You looked anywhere where the Prophet ﷺ was, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was close to him. He was a talented horseman. He's one of the few people who never fled the side of the Prophet ﷺ, even on the day of Uhud. So on the day of Uhud, it's a small group of people that after Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu attacked the Muslims from behind, rushed to the side of the Prophet ﷺ. Zayd is one of those blessed people who was with the Prophet ﷺ in Badr, who was next to the Prophet ﷺ in Uhud, who was with the Prophet ﷺ in Khandaq, and so he was digging next to the Prophet ﷺ, near the Prophet ﷺ, who was with the Prophet ﷺ on the day of Bay'atul Ridwan, the pledge that was taken under the tree, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He was pleased with those people. And never really makes his presence known except through that action. So he's always with the Prophet ﷺ. So all of the virtues of serving in that battle or in those battles and being next to the Prophet ﷺ, Zayd ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu has that position. On the day of Badr, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu remembered, he recalled an incident with his brother. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said that I saw him on the day of Badr and he was fighting without armor. He wasn't wearing a coat of armor. He was just going through the battlefield and fighting. So I went to my brother and I took off my armor and I said, Albis dir'i. I said, wear my armor. And Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu responded to me and he says, Inni uridu min ash-shahadati ma turid. I seek martyrdom in the same way that you seek martyrdom. Like, you know what you're saying and I know what I'm saying. I seek martyrdom the way that you seek martyrdom in this battle. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, so I left it in the battlefield and we both fought side by side on the day of Badr without our armor, without our shields. And of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them victory. Which shows you, by the way, subhanAllah, that their ferociousness in battle and their desire to be counted amongst the shuhada with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be counted amongst the martyrs, did not lead them to like slacken in their fighting, right? Or to just wish for someone to hurry up and strike them so they could die. I mean, they won multiple battles in this fashion. But Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was a man who said, I am a man who seeks shahada the same way that you seek shahada, Ya Umar. And the only narration that we have from Zayd ibn al-Khattab outside of the battlefield is on Hajjatul Wada', the farewell Hajj with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said that you should take care of those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted with you with. You should feed them of what you feed yourselves, and you should clothe them with what you clothe yourselves. So the Prophet ﷺ talking about the treatment of the mamluk, the treatment of the slave in society and the goodness that they should be treated with. Zayd radiallahu anhu narrates just that hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, and it's narrated from his nephew, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. So the Battle of Yamama takes place in Rabi' al-Awwal of the 12th year. We are, of course, in Rabi' al-Awwal in this year right now. So it takes place in Rabi' al-Awwal, the 12th year after Hijrah. Zayd ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu is commissioned to go out in the war against the apostates, Hurub al-Ridda, by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So he goes, and he is actually the first one who was holding the banner of the Muslims. And of course, that denotes a very special place amongst the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَكَانَتْ رَايَةُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مَعَهُ يَوْمَ الْيَمَامَةِ, as the scholars narrate, he is the flag bearer of the Muslims on that day of Yamama. And this was the fitna that was so severe that more companions were killed in this day than any other incident amongst all of the incidents that took place. Over 600 Sahaba were going to be martyred in this particular battle. So you can find multiple Sahaba that are going to be martyred on the day of Yamama. So he is the one who is holding the banner on the day of Yamama. Before the battle even flamed, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu came into a duel with al-Rajal. So when Zayd ibn al-Khattab killed him to start the battle, it actually had a huge impact on demoralizing the troops of Musaylama. These are the little things in history that you don't pay attention to. So Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu killed him in the duel. And then as the battle started, and the Muslims were hugely overwhelmed in terms of numbers and forces and weaponry and tricks in the Battle of Yamama. As the battle started, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu never stopped moving forward. He never stopped moving forward until he ended up fi nahr al-adu, right in the middle of the army. And Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was shouting out while he was holding the banner, أَمَّا الرِّجَالْ فَلَا رِجَالْ. As for the men, where are the men? Where are the men? So he's pushing the Sahaba to move forward. He doesn't like that some people are moving backwards because Musaylama had all sorts of military preparations and an army that's 10 times the size of the Muslims. And they're shooting them with, from catapults. They've got the Hadiqa, the garden of Musaylama, which is behind this huge fortress. It's not an easy battle. And so some of the Muslims are hesitant. And Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the only time you hear his voice is in battle. أَمَّا الرِّجَالْ فَلَا رِجَالْ. And then Zayd radiallahu anhu even gets frustrated at some point. So you can hear the Umar in him, the Umar radiallahu anhu in him. When Umar radiallahu anhu would be frustrated over people's hesitation towards the sunnah, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, Allahumma inni a'tadhiru ilayka min firari ashabi. Oh Allah, I seek forgiveness from you, from the fleeing of my companions. وَأَبْرَأُ إِلَيْكَ مِمَّا جَاءَ بِهِ مُسَيْلَمَةَ وَمُحَكَّمُ الْيَمَامَةِ. And I free myself from the evil of what Musaylama and Muhakkama, was one of his disciples, of Yamama have called to. I free myself from them. So Zayd is frustrated with the pace of the Muslims, and he's saying, Oh Allah, I seek forgiveness from you for their fleeing, and I declare myself innocent of the evil of Musaylama and Muhakkam. As he goes forward, he enters into, if you go back and you actually listen to al-Bara ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, remember al-Bara was literally catapulted into Hadiqat Musaylama, into the garden of Musaylama, right? He got that close to Musaylama al-Khattab, and Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was killed. Where is this man going to be standing in terms of the people who enter into Jannah? If Abu Bakr and Umar, may Allah be pleased with them, will be entering with the Prophet ﷺ to his sides, where is Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the quiet brother of Umar radiallahu anhu, who Umar testifies was more virtuous than him? And that tells you something. It's about the station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the position on the Day of Judgment and entering into Al-Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept him. Radiyallahu anhu wa an akhi. May Allah be pleased with his brother, Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gather us with them all, with our beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fil firdaus al-a'la. Allahumma ameen.